They say the call you never expect is the one that changes your life. For me, it wasn't a call. It was a stack of papers, crisp and impersonal, placed on my desk in a sterile office in Stuttgart, Germany. The words on them summed up 40 years of service in a single cold sentence. Effective immediately, Sergeant Major Eleanor Vance is honorably retired. Just like that. No final tour, no grand farewell parade. No last speech to the young soldiers I'd come to see as my own. One moment I was meticulously planning a joint training exercise. The next I was folding my uniform and packing a standard-issue duffel bag for the very last time. The shock was a physical thing. A sudden hollow space in my chest where the familiar driving rhythm of military life used to be. For 4 decades, I'd woken up before the sun with a clear mission. Protect, lead, serve. Now the only order was stop. But underneath that initial disorientation, a new feeling started to bubble up. Something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Pure, untethered excitement. For the first time in my adult life, I had no orders to follow, no deployment schedule to dictate my every move. I was free. And I knew exactly where my first free act would take me. Not to the quiet retirement cottage in the Virginia hills I'd been planning on. Not yet. I was going to Austin, Texas. I was going to surprise my son. My boy David. He was 35 now, a brilliant architect with a life of his own. A life I felt I'd mostly witnessed through a flickering screen. Our calls were a constant battle against crackling satellite connections and impossible time zones. I'd watched his college graduation on a delayed video feed from a dusty tent in Iraq, cheering silently so I wouldn't wake the other soldiers. I'd met his wife, Tiffany, a woman with a dazzling smile and, I thought, kind eyes, over a choppy video call from my Stark barracks room in Germany. I hadn't held him, hadn't seen him in person in nearly 2 long years. This wasn't just going to be a surprise. It was an overdue reunion, a reclaiming of lost time. The 14-hour flight from Frankfurt to Austin was an endless ribbon of recycled air, engine hum, and vivid anticipation. I bypassed the in-flight movies, instead just staring out at the sea of clouds below, my mind filled with images of David. I pictured his face, the way his serious, focused expression would melt away when he laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his father's smile a precious inheritance. I clutched the small, worn photograph in my wallet, its edges soft from years of handling. It was a picture of the 3 of us at the Texas State Fair when David was just a boy, perched high on his dad's shoulders, face sticky with cotton candy. His father, a good man and a fine soldier, gone too soon, had made me promise him one thing. Take care of our boy, Ellie. Always. And I had. From thousands of miles away, through letters and care packages and calls at odd hours, I had. As the taxi finally pulled onto his quiet suburban street in a leafy Austin neighborhood, a surge of warmth spread through me. Live oaks, ancient and graceful, draped their branches over perfectly manicured lawns. It was the picture of the American dream, the very thing I'd spent my entire life defending. I paid the driver, my heart thumping a happy, steady beat against my ribs, the rhythm of a soldier coming home. I walked up the stone path, my duffel bag feeling light on my shoulder, a genuine unforced grin spreading across my face. But that feeling, that pure joy, turned to jagged ice in my veins the moment I saw the house up close. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. The first sign was the lawn. It wasn't just in need of a trim, it was a wilderness. Weeds, thick and defiant, grew in tangled clumps, choking out the lush St. Augustine grass David had been so proud of, the same grass he'd spent an entire weekend laying with his own 2 hands. The vibrant flower beds that Tiffany had once shown me on a video call, bursting with color, were now a graveyard of brown, skeletal stems and desiccated leaves. Then I saw the mailbox. It was a custom one David had designed, shaped like a miniature modern house. Now it was tilted to one side at a drunken angle, its door hanging open like a broken jaw. A cascade of letters, slick magazines, and junk mail spilled onto the ground, soaked and warped into a pulpy mess from a recent rainstorm. I nudged the pile with the toe of my boot. Bills marked final notice in angry red letters. My military mind, a finely tuned instrument for threat assessment, was screaming alerts. This wasn't the home of a busy, successful architect. This wasn't a sign of simple neglect. This was a scene of abandonment. I walked up the porch steps, the wood groaning under my boots in the unnerving silence. A child's bright red tricycle lay on its side near the door, its wheels seized with rust. The sight sent a jolt of confusion through me. David and Tiffany didn't have children. Whose was it? Was it a gift, forgotten and left to decay? The whole scene felt wrong, like a stage set for a play I didn't understand. I raised my hand to knock, the knot of dread in my stomach tightening into a cold, hard stone. But before my knuckles could touch the faded blue paint of the door, a worried voice called out from across the street. "Ellie? Sergeant Major Vance, is that you?" I turned. It was Margaret, David's neighbor, a kind-faced woman in her 70s with a halo of white hair. She was standing in her perfectly kept rose garden, a watering can dangling from her hand. But the friendly smile I remembered from the one time we'd been introduced on a video call was gone. It was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock, her face as pale as a sheet. "Margaret," I said, my voice sounding rougher than I intended as I walked across the street toward her. "I'm sorry to startle you. I thought I'd surprise David." She set the watering can down with a clatter, her hands immediately beginning to fidget with the hem of her floral apron. "Oh, Ellie," she said, her voice trembling. "Oh, my dear child. You don't know, do you?" "Know what, Margaret?" I asked, my own voice instinctively steady, the parade ground tone I used when I needed to project calm in the face of chaos. Margaret's fearful eyes flickered back towards David's derelict house, then back to me. She took a hesitant step closer and lowered her voice to a horrified whisper, as if the perfectly trimmed hedges might have ears. "David, they took him by ambulance, Ellie. 2 weeks ago. It was the middle of the night, all those flashing lights, the sirens, it was terrible. The world tilted on its axis. 2 weeks. Where is he? Is he okay? What happened?" The questions tumbled out, my military composure cracking. She shook her head, tears finally welling in her soft, wrinkled eyes. "I don't know for sure. I tried calling his cell phone the next day, but it just went to voicemail. I thought about calling the police to do a wellness check, but I didn't want to overstep." She hesitated, wringing her hands, her gaze dropping to the sidewalk. "And that wife of his, Tiffany." A look of pure disgust twisted her gentle features. "What about Tiffany?" I pressed, my voice now sharp as glass. Margaret gripped my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong, her voice dropping even lower. "She's been posting, Ellie. All over the internet. Pictures from Cabo. On a yacht, for God's sake. Champagne parties, posing in a new bikini. All while David— Oh God, Ellie, you need to get to St. David's Hospital. That's where the ambulance went. Now." The hospital smelled of antiseptic, bleached linen, and a quiet underlying fear. It's a sterile combination you never get used to, whether you're visiting a wounded soldier in Landstuhl or your own son in Austin. At the main reception desk, the nurse's professional demeanor faltered the moment I said David Vance's name. A flicker of pity, of practiced sympathy, crossed her eyes. It was all the confirmation I needed that this was not a broken leg or a bout of pneumonia. "5th floor," she said softly, her voice gentle. "Intensive care unit. Room 512. The elevator ride was the longest 10 seconds of my life. My reflection in the polished steel doors was a stranger, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, lines of worry etched around her eyes like a roadmap of past deployments, still in the rumpled travel clothes she'd worn for the better part of 20 hours. The door slid open to a hallway of hushed, urgent efficiency. The only sounds were the soft, rubbery squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum and the distant, rhythmic beeping of machines that were keeping a floor full of people alive. Room 512. The door was closed. A small sign on it read, "Family only." I was family. Pushed it open. The beeping was louder in here. Insistent, electronic, unnatural. And the man in the bed. It took my mind a full, horrifying second to recognize him. His handsome face was gaunt, his skin a waxy, sallow color, stretched tight over his cheekbones. The strong, broad shoulders I remembered from our last hug at the airport were gone, shrunken and frail beneath a thin, pale blue hospital gown. A cruel, complex map of tubes and wires snaked across his still body, connecting him to a bank of monitors that blinked and hummed with the monotonous rhythm of artificial life. A doctor in a white coat, looking no older than some of my sergeants, turned from the monitors. He was clearly exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm his mother," I managed to say, my voice a dry, tight rasp. I'm Sergeant Major Eleanor Vance. He introduced himself as Dr. Evans, his voice low and grim. He didn't waste time with useless pleasantries, a trait I would normally appreciate. Mrs. Vance, your son has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's aggressive, and it's metastasized to his liver and lymph nodes. I'm so sorry. The words hit me like a physical blow, like shrapnel tearing through my gut. Cancer. Terminal. How long? I whispered. It's hard to say for certain, he said, his gaze full of compassion. Days perhaps. He gestured to the single, uncomfortable-looking visitor's chair, but my legs were frozen. We've been trying to contact his wife, the emergency contact on file. And? I asked, my voice flat, though I already knew the answer. He sighed, a weary, frustrated sound. She answered the first few times. Said she was out of the country on an urgent business trip and would be back as soon as she could. For the last 10 days, all our calls have gone straight to voicemail. Just then, a different nurse, a younger woman with kind, sad eyes, came in to check David's vitals. She saw me standing there, a statue of grief, and her face softened with sympathy. Then a miracle. David's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened and his hazy, unfocused eyes found mine. A flicker of recognition. A spark in the darkness. Mom! The word was barely a breath, a dry crackle of sound. I rushed to his side, stumbling over my own feet, and took his cold, fragile hand in mine. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Mama's here. A ghost of a smile, a faint tremor touched his chapped lips. Knew you'd come, he whispered. And then his eyes locked on mine. A moment of sudden, desperate clarity in the medication-fueled fog. Love you, Mom. Before I could say it back, before I could tell him I loved him more than life itself, more than any mission or medal, the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor behind him changed. It flattened. It became one long, piercing, final tone that sliced through the quiet room. His hand went limp in mine. Dr. Evans was shouting for a crash cart. Nurses were rushing in. Someone was gently but firmly pulling me away, guiding me out into the hallway as they swarmed his bed. Their voices a flurry of urgent medical commands. I stood there, frozen, listening to the desperate, rhythmic thud of hands on my son's chest. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Evans emerged from the room, his shoulders slumped, his face heavy with defeat. I'm sorry, he said. We did everything we could. As the horrible reality began to wash over me, the kind nurse from before, Sarah, approached me, her own eyes wet with tears. She put a hand on my arm. Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice thick with emotion. There's something you should know. When Mrs. Grant, Tiffany, called that first time, she didn't just say she was traveling. She was angry. Annoyed. She asked us why we were bothering her over a stomach flu, and told us not to call her again unless it was over. She told them not to bother her. While my son was dying. I have to ask you. If you were in my shoes hearing that, what would your first move have been? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know. Grief is a fog, but rage is a fire that burns it away. The drive back to David's house was no longer a blur. I saw everything with a cold, terrifying clarity. The vibrant green of the trees, the brilliant blue of the Texas sky, the smiling faces of people on the street who had no idea my world had just ended. The hospital had given me his personal effects in a clear plastic bag. His wallet, his watch, his keys, and his phone, its battery dead. I clutched the bag on my lap the entire way, the plastic crinkling under my white-knuckled grip. It was all I had left of him. Pushing open the front door for the second time was different. Before there was dread. Now there was purpose. The stale, sour air of the house no longer felt just sad. It felt like a crime scene. In the living room, the empty glasses and the half-empty bottle of expensive single-malt whiskey sat on the coffee table. I realized with a jolt that my son must have been drinking to numb the pain. Alone in this mausoleum of a house. The dust that coated every surface now seemed like a shroud. I walked over to the mantel. The family photos that used to be there, David's graduation, our fishing trips to Lake Travis, even his wedding day, were gone. Only lighter-colored rectangles on the faded paint remained, like ghosts of happy memories she had already erased. The kitchen was worse. A tower of greasy takeout containers and unwashed dishes filled the sink, a testament to a man too sick to cook for himself. And on the counter, amidst the pile of overdue bills from the mailbox, I found them. The credit card statements I had only glanced at before. Now, I sat down at the dusty kitchen table and went through them, line by sickening line, with the precision of an auditor. My breath caught in my throat. The numbers were staggering. Far worse than I'd even registered in my initial shock. A $15,000 charge for a week-long villa and yacht package in Cabo San Lucas, dated 2 days after David was admitted to the ICU. Nearly $50,000 at a high-end jewelry store in Miami. A single transaction for a diamond necklace. Thousands more for designer clothes from boutiques in Dallas. For spa treatments. For 5-star resort dinners with wine pairings. All charged to my son's credit card. All while he lay dying alone in room 512. This wasn't just neglect. This was a looting. It was a victory party. A celebration of his death before it had even happened. I sank into a dusty kitchen chair. The receipts trembling in my hands. I pulled David's phone from the plastic bag and found his charger in a drawer in his office. As it powered on, my heart hammered against my ribs. A war drum calling me to battle. I had to talk to her. I had to hear her voice. I had to see her face. Her number was saved in his contacts under my love. The irony was a bitter metallic taste in my mouth. I tapped the call button, my thumb deliberately switching it to video. She answered on the second ring. Her face filled the screen, framed by the blinding white deck of a yacht and a brilliant blue ocean behind her. Thumping dance music was pounding in the background. People were laughing. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, a tall champagne flute in one hand. She was the very picture of carefree, sun-drenched luxury. Well, look who it is, she said, a lazy, mocking smile playing on her perfectly glossed lips. Finally take a day off from playing soldier, Ellie? I said nothing. I just stared, letting the silence stretch, letting her see the cold, dead fury in my eyes. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. What's wrong? You look awful. David's gone, Tiffany, I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. For a single heartbeat, her mask slipped. I saw a flicker of something. Annoyance? Inconvenience? Then she shrugged her tan shoulders, took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, and said the words that sealed her fate. Well, he was sick. It was bound to happen. She looked off camera and laughed at something someone out of frame had said. And the $80,000 you've spent in the last 2 weeks? I asked, my voice still dangerously calm. The yacht? The jewelry? She turned back to me, her expression one of pure, shameless audacity. Oh, that? Don't be so dramatic. I'm his wife. His grieving widow now. What's his is mine. That's how marriage works, Ellie. You should try it sometime. I looked her straight in the eye through the phone screen and said in the calmest, coldest voice I could manage. Enjoy the sunshine, Tiffany. Because I'm about to bring the storm. Then I ended the call before she could utter another word. The rage was a living thing inside me. A hot, roaring fire that burned away the tears and the fog of grief. But 40 years in the army teaches you to channel your rage. You don't let it consume you. You let it fuel you. You analyze it, you aim it, you turn it into a weapon. My time for mourning would have to wait. My first priority was the mission. Secure the assets, cut off the enemy's supply line, and establish a fortified position. I started tearing through David's home office, a place that was once a sanctuary of creativity and meticulous design. Now a chaotic mess of discarded papers and half-empty coffee cups. Papers were everywhere, spilling from drawers piled on the floor. It felt like a deep violation, going through my son's private life, but I had no choice. I was no longer just his mother. I was the acting commander of his last stand. I was searching for anything: bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents, anything that could give me leverage in the war that was to come. I went through his desk drawers first, with a soldier's efficiency. Old blueprints, tax returns from 5 years ago, pens that had long since run out of ink. Nothing useful. I moved to the filing cabinet, my hands quickly sifting through folder after folder of architectural contracts, vendor receipts, and home renovation plans. Still nothing. My frustration was mounting into a cold dread. Tiffany was smart, I'd give her that. She was calculating. She would have made sure everything of value was in a joint account, legally in her name as his wife. In the eyes of the law, she was the grieving widow and I was just his mother. An outsider. I was fighting a losing battle. I was about to give up, to concede this first skirmish, when my eyes caught something on the bottom shelf of a tall bookcase. Tucked away behind a row of heavy, imposing architectural textbooks, the kind of books you display but never read, was a simple, unadorned leather portfolio. It was dark brown, almost black, and embossed with his initials DV in simple gold leaf. It was a gift I'd sent him for his 30th birthday from a small leather shop in Florence, Italy. My heart gave a painful, powerful lurch. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out and laid it reverently on the cluttered desk. It felt heavier than it should. Inside were the documents I expected. His original birth certificate, his social security card, a copy of his diploma from the University of Texas. Standard important papers. But in a stiff side pocket, there was a thick, sealed manila envelope. Neatly typed across the front, in a crisp official font, were 3 words that changed the entire war. Durable power of attorney. I ripped it open with a ferocity that surprised me. It was a multi-page legal document, properly notarized with a raised seal from a firm in downtown Austin, dated 18 months prior. In it, David Allen Vance granted me, his mother Sergeant Major Eleanor Vance, full and absolute power of attorney over all his financial, legal, and medical affairs in the event that he became incapacitated and unable to make decisions for himself. We had signed it as a precaution before my last 2-year deployment to Germany. It was a standard procedure for military families, a grim but necessary piece of planning, a document we both prayed we would never have to use. This piece of paper was more than just a legal document. It was a soldier's last order to his commanding officer. It was a mission, a sacred trust, entrusted to me by my son from beyond the grave. And I would not fail. Tiffany thought she had all the power because she was his wife. She thought that his death automatically made her the sole heir to everything he had ever worked for. But she didn't know about this. She didn't know that my son, my smart, thoughtful, forward-thinking son, had given me the one weapon that could stop her dead in her tracks. She had the marriage license. I had the power of attorney. The war had just begun, and I finally had my orders. With the POA in my hand, I knew exactly who to call. An old friend. A man who owed me a big favor from a very tight spot in Kandahar. A man they called Bulldog for a very good reason. The drive from Austin to San Antonio was a straight shot down I-35, but I barely registered the blur of Texas landscape outside my window. My focus was singular, my mind a whirlwind of strategy. The power of attorney document sat on the passenger seat beside me, its weight feeling more significant than any field manual I had ever carried. General Mike Bulldog Peterson wasn't just a friend. He was a force of nature. We had served together in Afghanistan. I had pulled his men out of a pinned-down position in a firefight they should not have survived. He had never forgotten it. After retiring from the Army with 3 stars on his shoulders, he'd taken a high-level civilian post overseeing a massive regional financial services center for military families and veterans. If anyone could cut through corporate red tape with a blowtorch, it was Mike. His office was on the top floor of a gleaming glass tower near Fort Sam Houston, a world away from the dusty command tents where we had last worked together. It was a shrine to military precision and success. Framed photos of him with presidents and foreign dignitaries lined the walls, but his handshake was still that of a grunt who'd crawled through the mud. He was older now, more silver in his close-cropped hair, but his eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, and missing absolutely nothing. "Ellie," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble as he closed the heavy oak door behind us, shutting out the rest of the world. "It's been too long. But I can see from your face this isn't a social call." I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Soldiers don't. I gave him the battlefield assessment, clear and concise. "My son is dead, Mike. He died yesterday. Pancreatic cancer. His wife? She's a predator. She's been draining his accounts while he was in the ICU." I laid the evidence out on his polished mahogany desk like captured enemy documents. The credit card statements, the yacht rental receipt, and finally, the power of attorney. Mike's expression, normally a stony, unreadable mask, hardened into something I recognized. The look of a commander who has just identified the enemy and is about to plan the counter-assault. He read through every page, his jaw tightening. He didn't say a word until he was done. Then he looked up at me, his eyes like chips of granite. This woman isn't just greedy, Ellie. This is a hostile action. This is predatory. Let's get to work. For the next hour, his luxurious office became a war room. He wasn't just making phone calls, he was issuing direct orders. He barked account numbers and legal statutes into his speakerphone with an authority that made CEOs and bank vice presidents snap to attention. I watched, a silent observer, as my old friend unleashed the full force of his power and influence. His conversation with the president of the bank that held David's main accounts was a masterclass in command. "I understand it's an unusual request, Mr. Henderson," he growled, his voice leaving no room for argument. "But I have in my hand a legally executed durable power of attorney, which was in effect prior to Mr. Vance's death, and I have clear, undeniable evidence of elder and infirm financial abuse. The account holder was incapacitated. His wife was not. You can either freeze every single account tied to this name right now, or my next call is to the SEC, the Texas Attorney General, and a friend of mine at the Wall Street Journal who loves stories about banks that facilitate fraud. Your choice. You have 30 seconds. There was a muffled, panicked response from the speakerphone. The accounts were frozen. One by one the dominoes fell. Checking accounts frozen. Savings and investment accounts frozen. Credit cards canceled. The automatic mortgage payment that was due to go through was authorized, but everything else was locked down tighter than a drum. Finally, he hung up the last call and slid a printout across the desk to me. "Operation Lockdown is complete, Sergeant Major," he said, a grim, satisfied smile touching his lips. "All remaining funds have been transferred to a new, secure trust account in your name as executor. She can't touch a single penny." I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since I walked into that hospital room. "Thank you, Mike. I don't know how to repay you. We're even," he said, his expression serious again. "But listen to me, Ellie. You cut off her money. That's like cutting off a shark's access to the water. She's going to come at you, and she's not going to fight fair. Be ready." He was right. As I was walking out of his office, my phone buzzed. It was Tiffany. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. The voicemails started pouring in, each one more frantic and unhinged than the last. But it was the fifth voicemail that made my blood run cold and revealed just how evil and how clever she truly was. I listened to the voicemails in the sterile quiet of my car in the parking garage, the concrete walls seeming to amplify Tiffany's shrill, panicked voice. The first few were a predictable storm of curses and confusion. "What the hell did you do, Ellie? My card was just declined at Neiman Marcus. Fix this now. Do you hear me?" The next was a direct threat. "You will regret this. I'm his wife. I will sue you for everything you have, you miserable old hag." Then, like a chameleon changing colors, her tone shifted to one of syrupy, fake pleading. "Ellie, please. I know you're grieving, we both are, but I have expenses. We can work this out, mother to daughter." The hypocrisy was nauseating, but the fifth voicemail was different. The panic was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. A low, controlled voice laced with a venom that chilled me to the bone. "You think you're so smart, you old soldier. You think you've won this little battle. You took the money, but I'm going to take everything else. I'm going to take his name. I'm going to take his reputation. By the time I'm done with you, everyone in this city, everyone who ever knew him, will think you're the monster. You just wait." I didn't have to wait long. The very next morning, my phone started blowing up with notifications. A text from Margaret, the neighbor. "Ellie dear, don't look at the Austin Chronicle's website." A message from a friend from my old unit. "Ellie, what the hell is this? Call me." With a sense of foreboding, I clicked the link she sent. It was an article on a popular Austin lifestyle blog, the kind of place that usually covers new restaurant openings and high society gossip. The headline was a gut punch. "Grieving Austin widow fights greedy. Estranged mother-in-law for dying husband's legacy." The author, a well-known local blogger named Jessica Finch, had written a heart-wrenching, completely fabricated piece, clearly fed to her line by Tiffany. It painted a masterful picture of a devoted, heartbroken wife being bullied by a cold, absentee military mother who had conveniently shown up at the last minute to seize control of the family fortune. Tiffany had supplied the photos, sweet, candid pictures of her and David in happier times, professional-looking shots of her staring tearfully at the camera. She had spun a tale of my being a distant, uncaring mother who was never there for David, and now in my greed, I was trying to steal the inheritance from the woman who had cared for him in his final painful months. The lie was so audacious, so complete, it was almost brilliant. But the worst part was the comments section. It was a digital lynch mob, a firing squad of public opinion. That poor woman, having to deal with a monster-in-law from hell. Sending you love and light, Tiffany. Typical career military woman. Probably doesn't even know how to be a mother. Heartless. Someone should start a GoFundMe for this grieving widow. She shouldn't have to fight this battle alone. Shame on Eleanor Vance. Sounds like she's guilty of stolen valor and now stolen inheritance. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the endless stream of hatred. Tiffany wasn't just fighting me for the money anymore. She was executing a scorched earth psychological warfare campaign on my character, on my relationship with my own son. She was trying to poison his memory, to make the world believe her vile, self-serving lies. It was a viciously effective strategy. In Austin, I was an outsider, a stranger. She was the beautiful, tragic local widow. Who were they going to believe? I felt cornered, outmaneuvered, and for the first time truly afraid. The legal battle was one thing. I knew how to fight on that field. But this was a different kind of warfare, a battle of public perception, and she had launched a devastatingly successful first strike. I had the truth on my side, but the truth was hidden away in bank statements and legal documents. Her lies were public, packaged with tears and perfect, smiling photos. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had to find something more. Something undeniable. Something that came directly from David himself. A voice from the grave to silence her lies for good. I needed more ammunition, and I had a feeling David, my strategic, thoughtful son, had left it for me somewhere in that chaotic house. I just had to find where. Returning to the chaos of David's house felt different now. I wasn't just a grieving mother sifting through memories. I was an investigator on a hostile reconnaissance mission, deep in enemy territory. The public attack had changed the rules of engagement. I had to think like David. Where would he keep something deeply private, something critically important? I started in his office again, but this time I was more methodical, more disciplined. I ignored the emotional clutter and focused on the physical space with a forensic eye. I ran my hands along the backs of bookshelves, checked for false bottoms in drawers, even pried up a loose floorboard I found under his desk. Nothing. For hours I searched, the hateful, anonymous words from the blog post echoing in my head. Absentee mother. Greedy monster. Heartless. Doubt, a soldier's most insidious enemy, began to creep in. What if there was nothing else? What if this was all I had? What if Tiffany, with her beautiful lies, actually won this war of words? Exhausted and defeated, I finally sat down heavily at his desk and buried my face in my hands. The scent of old paper, coffee, and the faint, familiar smell of his sandalwood aftershave lingered in the room. It was a scent that was so uniquely him, and it was a heartbreaking reminder of what I had lost. I let out a ragged sigh and looked up, my eyes blurry with unshed tears. My gaze landed on a small, unassuming leather-bound book on the corner of the desk, tucked beneath a heavy stack of architectural blueprints. It looked like a simple sketchbook or a day planner, something I had seen before and dismissed as unimportant. But now, drawn by some instinct I couldn't explain, I reached out and picked it up. It wasn't a sketchbook. It was his journal. The first few pages were what I expected. Rough sketches of buildings, notes on project deadlines, grocery lists, a reminder to get his car's oil changed. But as I flipped further, about a year ago, the entries changed. They became a meticulous, heartbreaking logbook of financial transactions. My blood ran cold as I read his neat, precise architectural handwriting. March 8th, $3,000 to Tiffany. She said her mother needed an emergency dental surgery, and insurance wouldn't cover it. Sent the money. I knew for a fact that Tiffany's mother had passed away from cancer 3 years ago. David and I had a long, somber phone call about it. He had even offered to fly with Tiffany to the funeral, but she told him she wanted to grieve alone. April 12th. $5,500 to Tiffany. Said the big hailstorm last month damaged the roof, and we needed to pay the contractor's deductible in cash immediately. I quickly checked the weather history on my phone. The hailstorm he mentioned had happened a full month after that entry. And I knew from the credit card statements I held that the charge on his card for that exact amount wasn't to a roofer. It was to a luxury Louis Vuitton store in Dallas. Page after page, it was the same sickening story. A litany of lies. Thousands of dollars for fabricated family emergencies, for phantom car repairs, for non-existent tax bills, each one funding her secret life of obscene luxury. He was documenting her deception, but the journal also revealed his own tragic confusion. The final entry from just 6 weeks ago broke my heart all over again. Confronted T about the charges on the Amex. She got so upset, cried, said I was being paranoid, that the stress of my diagnosis was making me forget things, making me confused. Maybe she's right. The doctor did say the pain medication could cause memory lapses. She wasn't just stealing from him. She was systematically gaslighting him, deliberately making him doubt his own sanity while he was battling a terminal illness. It was a level of psychological cruelty that was almost incomprehensible. I felt sick to my stomach, a cold, bitter bile rising in my throat. As I turned to the last page, a small folded piece of paper fell out from between the leaves. It was a printout of a screenshot from a phone. A text message exchange between Tiffany and someone saved in her contacts as Alicia. Alicia, how much longer do you have to play nurse? The Riviera is waiting for you. Tiffany, the doctor says he won't last much longer. Might as well enjoy his money while I can. I've already started moving the big chunks offshore just in case. I closed the journal, my knuckles white, the leather creaking under the pressure. The evidence was damning. It was proof of her lies, her manipulation, her cold, calculated, predatory plan. But was it enough to fight her very public smear campaign? Just then, an email notification pinged on David's laptop, which I had left open on the desk. It was a new message. From Tiffany. The subject line read, "A little secret." My finger hovered over the mouse, a cold sense of dread washing over me. An email from Tiffany now, after her public attack, could only mean one thing. Another volley in her psychological war. She was either going to gloat, threaten, or attempt some new twisted form of manipulation. With a deep breath, I clicked it open. The message was short, and it dripped with a smug, condescending arrogance that made my skin crawl. Ellie, since you're so interested in going through my poor, dead husband's things, you might want to take a look in the storage room in the basement. He had his secrets too. Maybe he wasn't the perfect, sainted son you seem to remember. Enjoy the truth. T. A basement? My mind reeled. The house was a classic single-story Texas ranch. As far as I knew, it didn't have a basement. It was another one of her games, a wild goose chase designed to make me feel foolish, another attempt to gaslight me, to make me question what was real. I almost deleted the email in disgust. But then a memory surfaced, something David had told me years ago when he bought the house. He'd mentioned a small storm cellar, a common feature in older Texas homes, that the previous owners had sealed off and converted into a storage closet. My heart started to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. It was a long shot, but I had to check. I went to the utility room at the back of the house. Behind a stack of dusty, forgotten moving boxes, I found it. A small square door, flush with the wall, painted the same color to make it almost invisible. It wasn't a circuit breaker panel. The door wasn't locked. I pulled it open, revealing a set of narrow, steep wooden stairs leading down into cool darkness. I fumbled for a light switch just inside the frame, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, illuminating a small 10 by 10 foot room with rough concrete walled. It was mostly filled with what I expected. Plastic bins of Christmas decorations, old college textbooks, a deflated air mattress. It looked exactly like what she'd called it, a storage room. I felt a pang of disappointment and anger. She'd played me. This was just another cruel joke. But then my eyes, trained by years of searching for IEDs and hidden weapon caches in the monochromatic deserts of Afghanistan, noticed something out of place. The concrete floor was uniform, except for one small section in the far corner. It was a 2 by 2 foot square that was a slightly different color, a patch job. The texture was smoother. It was too neat, too deliberate. I went back upstairs and retrieved a heavy-duty screwdriver and a small crowbar from David's toolbox. Back in the cellar, I knelt down and started to pry at the edges of the patch. It came away easily, crumbling into dust, revealing not more concrete, but the flat, gray lid of a small fireproof metal safe that had been embedded in the floor. My hands trembled with a mixture of hope and fear as I worked the heavy lid open. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single USB flash drive and a handwritten note, carefully sealed in a clear plastic bag. It was David's distinctive, architectural handwriting. "Mom, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you everything. I wanted to fight this battle myself. Stupid soldier's pride, I guess. Everything you need to know, everything you need to win is on this drive. She's not who you think she is. I know you'll do what's right. You always have. I love you more than words can say, David." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent, as I clutched the note to my chest. My boy. My brave, brave boy. He'd been fighting his own secret war, all alone, and he had left me the intelligence I needed to win it for him. I took the drive upstairs and plugged it into his laptop with a steady hand. There was only one file on it, a video file named, "For Mom." I double-clicked. David's face filled the screen. He was shockingly thin, the cruel evidence of his disease stark on the video, but his eyes were clear and fiercely resolute. He looked directly into the camera, as if he were looking right at me. "Hi, Mom," he began, his voice raspy but strong. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone." He took a steadying breath and continued, laying out everything. The cancer diagnosis. His decision not to tell me while I was still on active duty because he didn't want me to worry. And then the unvarnished, ugly truth about Tiffany. "She's been stealing from me," he said, his voice finally cracking with a pain that had nothing to do with the cancer. "Hiding money in offshore accounts." When I finally told her about the diagnosis, her first question was about my life insurance. The video continued. He explained that he'd hired a private investigator who had uncovered her sordid past, her other identities, her other wealthy, sick husbands who had died under mysterious circumstances. Then he leaned closer to the camera, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "I recorded her, Mom, with hidden microphones. It's all on this drive. Our conversations. Her phone calls when she thought I was asleep. Use it. Don't let her get away with this. Don't let her do this to anyone else." Armed with my son's final words and the irrefutable, undeniable proof of Tiffany's pure evil, I didn't just call my lawyer. I picked up the phone and called the Austin Police Department's Homicide Division. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to end this war. The next 48 hours were a blur of coordinated strategic action. I met with my lawyer Ben Carter, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had been a JAG officer in the Marines and understood the language of warfare. When I played him the video and audio files from the USB drive, his jaw literally dropped. He listened intently, his expression shifting from professional concern to visible, barely contained fury. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice tight with anger, "this isn't just a probate dispute anymore. This is criminal fraud, exploitation, and possibly something much worse. This is an airtight case." He immediately filed for an emergency hearing to enforce the power of attorney and seize full, uncontested control of the estate. The Austin PD, meanwhile, armed with David's explosive evidence, upgraded their fraud investigation. They now had proof of intent, of premeditation. The wheels of justice, once seemingly stuck in the mud of Tiffany's public relations campaign, began to turn with the force and speed of a tank. The day of the hearing, I walked into the Travis County Courthouse feeling like I was preparing for a court-martial. I wore a simple, severe navy blue suit, my back ramrod straight, my expression an unreadable mask of military composure. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was my son's proxy, his sworn avenger. Tiffany was already there, sitting at the respondent's table beside a slick, silver-haired, expensive-looking lawyer. She was dressed in a conservative, high-necked black dress, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief. She was playing the part of the tragic, persecuted widow to perfection, a masterclass in manipulation. When she saw me walk in, her eyes shot daggers of pure hatred for a split second before she quickly rearranged her face into a mask of heartbreaking sorrow for the judge to see. The hearing began. Tiffany's lawyer went first, his voice smooth and condescending. He argued passionately that my power of attorney was null and void upon David's death, and that this was a shameless, cruel attempt by an estranged absentee mother to disinherit his loving, devoted wife. He called me a vulture, circling what was left of my son's life. Then it was Ben's turn. He stood up, calm, methodical, and radiating a confidence that settled my nerves. He presented the bank statements. He presented David's journal. He presented the private investigator's report on her multiple identities and suspicious past marriages. Then he looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play a short audio recording, recovered from the deceased's personal effects, dated just 3 weeks before his passing." He pressed play on a small digital recorder. The courtroom was utterly silent as Tiffany's voice, cold, clear, and dripping with venom, filled the air. "Don't be so dramatic. You were fun for a while, but let's be honest. I married you for financial security, and now I have to wait around while you waste away. It's just not fair to me." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Tiffany had gone ghost white, her perfect composure shattering. Her lawyer was shuffling his papers, refusing to look at his client. But Ben wasn't done. He played the second recording, the one of her on the phone with her friend, Alicia. "The doctor says he won't last much longer. Thank God. I've already started moving the big chunks of his money offshore." That was it. That was the kill shot. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen and heard everything, stared down from the bench at Tiffany with a look of pure, undisguised contempt. She didn't even need to hear further arguments. Based on the frankly shocking and morally reprehensible evidence presented here today, the judge announced, her voice ringing with judicial authority, "This court grants temporary and full control of the estate of David Vance to the petitioner, Eleanor Vance. Furthermore, Mrs. Grant is prohibited from accessing or disposing of any and all assets, and I am signing an order to freeze her personal accounts as well, pending the outcome of the ongoing and, I assume, soon-to-be upgraded criminal investigation." The gavel came down with a sharp final crack that echoed in the silent room. Tiffany shot to her feet, her facade of the grieving widow completely evaporated, replaced by the snarling face of a cornered animal. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice a raw scream of fury and disbelief. "That money is mine. The house is mine." She turned and pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "This isn't over, Ellie. You have no idea who you're dealing with. We had won the battle, but her raw, unhinged threat echoed in my ears." As we walked out of the courthouse into the bright Texas sun, my lawyer's phone rang. He listened for a moment, his face grim. He hung up and turned to me. "That was the police," he said. "They just issued a warrant for Tiffany's arrest on charges of felony fraud and exploitation of the infirm. But she had a car waiting. She disappeared from the courthouse." The victory in court felt like a fleeting, hollow triumph. We had won control of the estate, we had exposed her lies, but the enemy had escaped the battlefield. Tiffany had slipped out of the courthouse through a side exit like a coward and vanished into thin air. Her slick, expensive lawyer claimed he had no idea where she was, professing shock at the evidence and immediately filing a motion to withdraw from her case. Her upscale downtown apartment was empty, cleared out of personal items. Her phone was turned off, her digital trail gone cold. She was a ghost. I was back at David's house, the oppressive silence pressing in on me, when Detective Miller from the Austin PD called. He didn't sound like a man with good news. "Sergeant Major Vance," he said, his voice all business, no frills. "I'm afraid the situation has become significantly more complicated." "She ran, didn't she?" I asked, a fresh wave of white-hot anger washing over my grief. "She did. She's in the wind." But that's not all. There was a heavy pause on the line. "We ran the fingerprints we lifted from a glass in her apartment. They didn't match anyone named Tiffany Grant, because no such person legally exists. They did, however, match a woman from Florida named Amanda Thorne, who was investigated, but never charged, in the death of her wealthy, elderly husband 6 years ago. And they also match another woman from Scottsdale, Arizona, named Chloe Sterling, whose sick, retired CEO husband died of a sudden heart attack, just 6 months after marrying her, leaving her his entire fortune." My blood ran cold. The private investigator's report had hinted at this, but hearing it confirmed by law enforcement made it terrifyingly real. "What are you saying, detective?" "I'm saying your daughter-in-law is a professional, Mrs. Vance. A black widow. We believe she's part of a sophisticated, multi-state ring that targets wealthy, terminally ill or vulnerable men. They have a team that creates new identities, finds the targets, and then an operative, a woman like Tiffany, goes in to establish a relationship. They push for a quick marriage to gain legal access to the assets, and then they systematically drain the accounts. When the victim dies, they disappear and start over with a new name in a new city. The clinical, detached way he described it was sickening. My son, my brilliant, kind David, hadn't just married a gold digger. He had been targeted, researched, infiltrated, and systematically dismantled by a ruthless criminal organization. The thought was nauseating. My personal fight for justice for my son had just become part of a much larger, darker war. I wasn't just fighting Tiffany anymore. I was fighting a whole hydra-headed network of ghouls who preyed on the sick and vulnerable for a living. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice hardening, my grief transmuting into cold, hard resolve. The mission parameters had changed, but the objective remained: neutralize the threat. "We've put out an all-points bulletin with all 3 identities," Miller said. "We're tracking her financial footprints, but she's good. She knows how to move money through shell corporations and cryptocurrency. She knows how to disappear. Anything you can think of, Sergeant Major, any friends she ever mentioned, any places she liked to go, no matter how small." My mind raced, but it was a blank. Tiffany had been a phantom, a carefully constructed persona. She had no real friends, no real interest beyond spending my son's money. How do you hunt a ghost? Just as I was about to give up hope, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. It was the blogger Jessica Finch. Her voice was shaky, filled with a mixture of shame and urgency. "Mrs. Vance." "Ellie," she began, her words tumbling out. "I just saw the news report about the court hearing about the warrant. I am so deeply sorry. I was wrong about you. Tiffany duped me, she played me for a fool." "She's a professional, Jessica," I said, too tired and too focused to be angry with her. "I know. And I want to help make it right." There was a pause. "She made one mistake, Mrs. Vance. She got arrogant. She was so sure she was going to win in court today. She was bragging to me yesterday about where she was going to go to celebrate afterwards, to get away from all the family drama." A surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric, shot through me. "Where, Jessica? Where did she say she was going?" "A small private resort in Key West, Florida," Jessica said, her voice rushing now, eager to atone for her mistake. "The Sunset Sanctuary Villas. She said it was her favorite place to decompress and recharge. She even showed me pictures of it on her phone. It's very exclusive, apparently. You need a membership or a referral to even book a room." Florida. Of course. It was where one of her other identities, Amanda Thorne, had operated. It was familiar territory for her. The arrogance was breathtaking. She wasn't just running. She was retreating to her favorite luxury hideout. It was a gamble, a long shot based on the word of a blogger she had manipulated, but it was the only real lead we had. I relayed the information to Detective Miller immediately. I could almost hear the change in his posture over the phone. "That fits her profile perfectly," he said, a new energy in his voice. "High-end, hard to access, and in a state where she has a history and possibly a support network. It's a bold move, but predators like her often get careless when they feel they're in the clear. We'll coordinate with the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and the U.S. Marshals down there. Don't go anywhere, Sergeant Major. And do not try to contact her." The next 24 hours were the purest form of agony. I paced the floors of David's quiet house, unable to sit still, unable to eat. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that passed on the street, sent my nerves into overdrive. I felt useless, powerless. I was a soldier without a weapon, a commander stuck in the rear echelon waiting for battlefield reports. All I could do was trust that my intelligence was good, and that the teams on the ground would execute the mission flawlessly. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away the last physical traces of her, needing something to do with my hands while my mind raced. Finally, at dawn the next day, just as the first rays of sun were cutting through the Austin darkness, my phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "We got her, Sergeant Major," he said, and for the first time, I could hear a genuine note of satisfaction in his professional voice. "Florida Highway Patrol picked her up an hour ago on the overseas highway." He explained the whole operation with crisp tactical detail. They hadn't stormed the resort. That would have been too risky and could have tipped her off. Instead, the U.S. Marshals had put a quiet but constant surveillance on the villa. They had flagged the high-end convertible she had rented in the system. When she finally left the resort early that morning, presumably to head to Miami International Airport to flee the country with a new passport, a state patrol car, waiting just a few miles down the road, pulled her over for a routine traffic stop for a minor speeding infraction. Miller sent me a link to a short news clip from a local Florida news station that had already picked up the story. The footage was shaky, clearly filmed by a bystander on their cell phone, but it was unmistakable. It showed Tiffany, dressed in expensive white linen pants and a silk top, standing on the side of the iconic 7 Mile Bridge, the turquoise water of the Florida Keys sparkling behind her like a cruel postcard. She was arguing with a state trooper, her hands gesturing wildly, her voice inaudible but her body language screaming indignation and outrage. Then a second unmarked car pulled up, and 2 plainclothes U.S. Marshals got out. The moment she saw them, her face transformed. The indignant rage evaporated, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated panic of a cornered animal. The final shot of the clip was of her being placed in the back of the patrol car, her hands cuffed behind her back. The camera zoomed in on her face through the car window. The mask was finally irrevocably gone. There was no beautiful, grieving widow, no sophisticated socialite. There was only a cheap, common criminal, her ugly, predatory soul laid bare for the whole world to see. Watching her being led away in handcuffs brought a grim, cold sense of satisfaction. It was a victory, a major one. But as the adrenaline of the hunt faded, a profound emptiness took its place. I had won. I had stopped her. I had honored my son's last request. Justice for David's stolen money was finally served. Or so I thought. As I would soon learn, getting justice for his death was one thing. The real fight, the one for his true legacy, was just beginning. We held David's funeral a week later, after the storm of Tiffany's arrest had finally begun to subside. I had braced myself for a small, quiet service. In my mind, I had pictured a mostly empty chapel. After all, my career had been my life, and it had kept me from being a real part of his community in Austin. I knew the names of his partners at the prestigious architecture firm where he worked, but I didn't truly know his friends, his neighbors, the people who populated his everyday life. I worried that the service would just be me, Margaret from across the street, and a few of his obligated colleagues. I couldn't have been more wrong. The place was packed. Every single pew was filled. People stood 3 deep along the back walls, spilling out into the foyer. There were dozens of his colleagues from the firm, clients whose beautiful homes he had designed, and neighbors like Margaret who had come to pay their respects to the quiet, kind man who always had a friendly wave for them. One by one they came up to me before the service, their faces etched with genuine sorrow, sharing small precious stories. One man told me how David had spent an entire Saturday helping him, a virtual stranger, fix a broken fence after a storm. A young woman from his office tearfully recounted how David had stayed late every night for a week to help her prepare for her architectural licensing exam. But it was a group of about a dozen teenagers sitting together in the front pews that truly caught my attention. They were a diverse group of kids, black, white, Hispanic, dressed awkwardly and uncomfortably in their Sunday best. They looked out of place, yet they watched the entire service with a raw, heartbreaking intensity. After the service, as people milled around sharing memories, a handsome, well-dressed man in his 40s approached me, the teens trailing nervously behind him. "Mrs. Vance," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind. "I'm Marcus Thorne. I run a small non-profit organization here in East Austin called Future Builders. These are some of our students." Future Builders. The name rang a distant, faint bell from one of my brief calls with David. David was our most dedicated mentor, Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion. He came to our workshop every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon without fail for the last 3 years. He taught these kids how to draft, how to use design software, how to see the world with an architect's eye. He didn't just teach them skills, Mrs. Vance. He taught them that where they came from didn't have to define where they were going. One by one, the kids came forward, their shyness overcome by their need to share what David had meant to them. A quiet, artistic girl named Maria, who couldn't have been more than 16, showed me a detailed sketch of a sustainable low-income community library she had designed. "Mr. Vance helped me with the perspective," she whispered, her eyes shining. "He said I had a real gift, that I could change the world with my buildings." A tall, lanky boy named Sam, who radiated a nervous energy, told me how David had not only written him a letter of recommendation for a scholarship to the University of Texas Architecture program, but had also personally driven him to the interview. "He was the only adult in my life who believed I could get in," Sam said, his voice cracking. "I start in the fall." I listened to their stories, my heart swelling with a mixture of overwhelming pride and a fresh, deep wave of grief. This was the son I knew, the kind and generous soul, but this was a side of his life I had never been privileged to see up close. He wasn't just building structures of steel and glass. He was building lives, building futures. While I was off serving my country, my son was here, at home, quietly, diligently serving his community in the most profound way possible. As the crowd began to thin, Marcus Thorne pulled me aside, his expression troubled. "Ellie," he said, "there's something else. David, he wasn't just a mentor. He was our primary benefactor. He was funding a large part of our operational budget out of his own pocket. And we're about to lose our workshop space. The building we were leasing has been sold. David had been working on a plan to find us a new permanent home." He handed me a folded, crisp letter from his jacket pocket. "He gave this to me a few months ago," he said. "He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should find you and give it to you." I unfolded the letter with trembling hands. It was David's familiar, precise handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, then you know about future builders. These kids are special. They're brilliant and tough and full of potential. Please, whatever you do with what's left, don't let them down." A new mission was taking shape before my eyes. A mission far more important than hunting down a criminal. A mission to build. Tiffany's arrest and the subsequent legal proceedings, which unfolded in the news like a lurid daytime soap opera, became background noise to me. The state of Texas, along with the FBI, was building a massive RICO case against her and her entire criminal network. My involvement was reduced to giving formal statements and providing the treasure trove of evidence David had so carefully collected. My focus, my entire being had shifted. I had a new set of orders delivered in my son's own hand. Don't let the kids down. The first thing I did was call a meeting with Ben Carter, my lawyer, and the financial advisor from Bulldog Peterson's office who was now managing the newly formed trust account. The money recovered from Tiffany, once all of David's assets were liquidated and her fraudulent transfers were clawed back by the banks, was substantial. It felt like blood money, tainted by her greed and my son's suffering, and I was determined to wash it clean by using every last penny for good. Following the spirit and letter of David's last wishes, we legally established the David Vance Legacy Project. Its first and primary mission objective: to secure a permanent state-of-the-art home for the Future Builders program. Finding a suitable building in Austin's booming real estate market was a challenge. But my entire career had been about logistics, strategy, and overcoming impossible challenges on shoestring budgets. I approached the task like a military operation. I scouted locations in underserved neighborhoods, I analyzed zoning laws and building codes like enemy intelligence, and I negotiated with commercial real estate agents with the tenacity of a drill sergeant. We finally found it. A defunct boarded-up community center in an East Austin neighborhood that desperately needed a beacon of hope. It was old and neglected, covered in graffiti, but it had good bones. It had potential. It was a perfect mission for us. The renovation became my life. I was on site every day from dawn till dusk, trading my combat boots for steel-toed work boots. I wasn't just overseeing the project from a distance. I was a part of it. I learned how to read complex architectural blueprints, how to manage teams of contractors, how to make a budget stretch in ways I never thought possible. It was the most challenging and most rewarding work I had ever done. The kids from the program were there, too. On weekends, they'd come and help with painting, landscaping, and safe demolition work, their energy and excitement filling the dusty space with life and laughter. They weren't just building a new workshop. They were building a tangible piece of their own future. 6 months into the renovation project, I got the final call from the district attorney's office. Tiffany, or whatever her real name was, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, and the prospect of multiple life sentences in several states, had taken a plea deal. She agreed to testify against the entire network, to give up the names of the ringleaders and the crooked lawyers who facilitated their schemes, in exchange for a single sentence of 25 years to life in a federal penitentiary. Justice, in its slow, methodical, bureaucratic way, had finally been delivered. The day the news broke, I was standing in the main workshop of the nearly completed center. The dust from drywall still hung in the air, but the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that David would have loved were installed, flooding the cavernous space with the golden light of the late afternoon. The news of her sentence didn't bring me the surge of triumphant joy I thought it would. It was just closure. A quiet final end to a dark and ugly chapter. The real joy was in looking around at the space we were creating together. It was more than just a building. It was a testament to a life well lived. It was a promise to a new generation of builders and dreamers. We were building a vibrant future from the ashes of my grief. One day, while I was at the newly opened center overseeing the final touches for a community charity event, I met a little boy with eyes full of fight and a dream that was bigger than his tiny hospital room. His name was Leo. Leo was 8 years old. He was a patient from the pediatric oncology ward at Dell Children's Hospital, visiting the newly opened David Vance Center as part of a special outreach day we had organized. He was in a small decorated wheelchair, a blue knitted cap covering his bald head, but he moved through the bustling room with a fierce, determined energy that commanded attention. While the other kids were marveling at the 3D printers and the finished architectural models, Leo was studying the exposed steel support beams and the HVAC system schematics I had framed and hung on the wall as art. "Are you the person in charge here?" he asked, wheeling himself right up to me, his voice surprisingly strong and clear, devoid of the shyness I saw in many of the other children. "I am," I smiled, kneeling down to be at his eye level. "My name is Ellie. This is a really cool building," he said, his gaze intense and analytical, scanning the high ceilings. "The load-bearing walls are really well placed to maximize the open concept design without sacrificing structural integrity." I was completely taken aback. I'd had conversations with licensed contractors who weren't that observant. "You know about load-bearing walls?" "Of course," he said, looking at me as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I'm going to be a space engineer. I'm going to design the first self-sustaining city on Mars. You can't have the roofs of the biodomes caving in on Mars. The pressure differential would be catastrophic." I found myself utterly captivated by this tiny, brilliant, brave boy. I spent the rest of the afternoon talking with him, leaving the supervision of the event to Marcus and the other volunteers. I learned that he had an aggressive form of leukemia. I learned that his mother had passed away from an illness the year before, and his father was not in the picture. He was a ward of the state, living in a series of temporary foster homes when he wasn't in the hospital for his grueling treatments. But he didn't talk about his illness or his situation with a trace of self-pity. To him, cancer was just an obstacle, a temporary, frustrating engineering problem that had to be solved on the way to his real mission: getting humanity to Mars. His unbreakable spirit, his quiet determination in the face of overwhelming odds, reminded me so much of David. I started visiting him at the hospital. At first, I told myself it was just part of the center's ongoing outreach. I'd bring him advanced books on astrophysics and structural engineering that I had to study beforehand just to keep up with him. We'd talk for hours about rocket propulsion, gravitational fields, and the challenges of creating a breathable atmosphere on a hostile planet. The nurses at the hospital told me that my visits were the highlight of his long, painful weeks. I soon had to admit to myself that they were the highlight of mine, too. This small boy, who had every reason in the world to be broken and angry, was instead filled with an unshakable, inspiring hope. He was a fighter. He was a survivor. He was a soldier in the truest sense of the word. One day, his primary oncologist, a compassionate woman named Dr. Chan, pulled me aside after one of my visits. She told me that Leo was about to enter the most critical phase of his treatment, a bone marrow transplant, which would require months of recovery in a highly sterile, stable, and supportive home environment. It was something the overburdened and under-resourced foster care system was struggling to provide for a child with such complex medical needs. She looked at me, a silent, hopeful question hanging in the air between us. That night, I sat alone in David's study, which had now fully become my office. For 40 years my life had been about the mission, about serving my country. Then my mission had become getting justice for my son. Now that mission was complete. I was 60 years old, retired, alone in a house that was far too big and far too quiet. I had never ever thought about being a mother again. I had often felt I'd failed at it the first time around, always being so many thousands of miles away. But looking at Leo, I didn't see a replacement for David. I saw a different, new mission. A mission to provide support, to foster a brilliant mind, to give a little soldier the loving, stable headquarters he needed to win his most important war. It was the scariest, most illogical, and most profound decision I had ever made. And the most right. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called Child Protective Services to begin the long and arduous process of becoming a foster parent. The day I was finally approved and brought Leo home to David's house, I was more nervous than I'd ever been on the eve of a major combat operation. He wheeled himself into the living room, looked around at the pictures of David I had placed back on the mantel, and then looked at me and asked, "Is this my room now?" I knelt down on the hardwood floor, so my eyes were level with his in his wheelchair. I looked into his bright, intelligent, and slightly apprehensive eyes, and I told him the simple, honest truth. "No, Leo," I said softly, my voice steady. "The room we made for you upstairs, the one with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and all the books about space, that's your room. It was made especially for you. This room, the office with all of these pictures and blueprints, this is still David's room. It's his space. And he's sharing his house with us." He considered this for a long, serious moment, his small brow furrowed in concentration. I held my breath, worried I had said the wrong thing, that I had somehow made him feel like an intruder in a house full of ghosts. Then he nodded slowly, a profound wisdom that belied his 8 years shining in his face. "That's good," he said with conviction. "People shouldn't be replaced. But there can be new people too." And in that moment, this extraordinary 8-year-old boy summed up everything I had been struggling to understand for the past year. You don't move on from grief. You learn to move forward with it, to carry it with you. You don't replace what you've lost. You make new room in your heart, building new wings onto the house of your soul. Our life found a new rhythm, a new normal. It was a life dictated by hospital appointments and chemotherapy schedules, of careful sterilization and managing medication side effects. There were hard days, days of crushing fatigue and pain that made him cry out in his sleep. But there were also good days. Days filled with building complex Lego models of the Mars rover on the living room floor, so intricate they took up the entire coffee table. Days of late-night talks, looking through David's old telescope at the craters of the moon and the rings of Saturn, him explaining the science to me. Days filled with laughter, a sound that chased the lingering shadows from the corners of the house. The quiet, empty house was finally filled with life again. The David Vance Center for Young Builders thrived beyond my wildest dreams. And Leo became its unofficial mascot and chief engineering consultant. He'd visit with me, talking with the teenagers about the structural integrity of their designs, offering them surprisingly insightful critiques. The kids in turn adored him. They saw in him the same brilliant, unstoppable spirit they had so admired in David. They became his protective, boisterous army of older brothers and sisters. One evening, about a year after Leo officially came to live with me, we were sitting together on the back porch, watching the fiery Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. His latest scans had been good. His hair was starting to grow back a soft dark fuzz. He was getting stronger every single day. He was quiet for a long time, just watching the sky. Then he turned to me, his expression serious. "Ellie," he said, "do you think David would like me?" I wrapped my arm around his small, wiry shoulders and pulled him close, my heart feeling like it might burst. "Oh, honey," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He would have absolutely loved you. He would have thought you were the coolest, smartest kid in the whole world. He would be so proud of what we're doing here. Of you." We sat there together in the warm twilight, watching the first stars begin to appear. The gaping wound in my heart from losing David would never fully heal. I knew that. But it wasn't an empty, aching void anymore. It was filled with a new purpose, a new mission, a new and unexpected love. We had built a new family from the ashes of a terrible tragedy. We were honoring the past by building a vibrant, hopeful future, together. That's my story. It's a story of loss, betrayal, and a fight for justice. But in the end, it's also a story of hope, resilience, and the unexpected new beginnings that can grow from our deepest grief. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight for a loved one's legacy? Or found unexpected hope in the wake of a tragedy? Please share your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they help all of us feel a little less alone. And if you haven't already, please give this video a like if it touched you, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next true story. Thank you so much for listening.